Sup, chooms, how y'all living? Hope everything is Nova and you're all having a preem week. Now, you chooms know that I like to joke around a bit in my videos, but you're not going to find any jokes in this video because this subject is deadly serious. This is something that is going to cause children to die. I'm not kidding. This is no joke. The only joke here is the person who is the leading health authority in the United States. Just think about this for a second, homies. I want you all to take a moment and imagine something. Imagine there was a director of the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, who felt that pregnant women wearing seatbelts cause autism. Imagine that this person felt so strongly about it that he changed the CDC webpage on wearing seatbelts and stated that it has never been proven that seatbelts do not cause autism. Now, suppose there were some scientist who said, wait a minute, science doesn't work like that. You can't just make a claim like that without evidence. You have to prove that seatbelts cause autism before writing that on the CDC website, especially since we have lots of studies showing that seatbelts save lives in car accidents. Suppose the CDC response is, well, the old CDC webpage only said that seatbelts do not cause autism because the CDC was trying to avoid seatbelt hesitancy. And the scientists say back, well, yes, seatbelt hesitancy is a bad thing, and you will cause thousands of deaths by claiming that seatbelts cause autism without any evidence. Now, let's make this worse and say that there actually is evidence that seatbelts don't cause autism. Say there are a dozen or so studies that have been done, and those studies all say that none of them disclose an association between seatbelts and autism. Even worse, let's say this whole idea about seatbelts causing autism got started by an old study that was later found to be fraudulent and was retracted. But still, even after all this evidence, the seatbelt causing autism promoter says, so what? None of these studies are perfect, so you still have to prove to me that pregnant women wearing seatbelts does not cause autism. After all, there are more pregnant women wearing seatbelts than ever before, and the number of cases of autism is rising too. After that, the scientist throws up his hands in the air and he gives up. He'll ask, how can you expect us to prove that something doesn't exist, other than by doing studies that don't show any evidence that it does exist? Well, of course, most of you know by now that what I'm talking about is what that buffoon RFK Jr. just did to the CDC website. He might as well have sprayed it with obscene graffiti. So, despite his phony promises not to promote his anti-vax agenda to the Senate when he was confirmed, the CDC webpage of vaccines is now despoiled with anti-vax propaganda. The page still shows the heading, Vaccines do not cause autism, but there is an asterisk there now. The footnote that this asterisk refers to says, quote, the header that vaccines do not cause autism has not been removed due to an agreement with the chair of the U.S. Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee that it would remain on the CDC website, unquote. The chair of the U.S. Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee is Bill Cassidy, who is a Republican senator from Louisiana and a medical doctor. Senator Cassidy's vote was the deciding vote that resulted in the appointment of RFK Jr. to be the head of the Department of Health and Human Services. He had the power to save this country from this moronic anti-vaxxer forever, but he didn't. And that's because he was assured by Kennedy personally that he would not change the text of the CDC website to suggest that vaccines cause autism. Here's how Kennedy responded to him during the committee meeting.
If the data is brought to you, and these studies that have been out there for quite some time and have been peer-reviewed, and it shows that these two vaccines are not associated with autism, will you ask, no, I need even more? Or will you say, no, I see this, it's stood the test of time, and I unequivocally and without qualification say that this does not cause autism?
Not only will I do that, but I will apologize for any statements that misled people otherwise.
Thank you.
Later on the Senate floor, Cassidy explained why he was voting for Kennedy.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a statement regarding my vote in committee on behalf of Robert F. Kennedy to be the Secretary of HHS. Now, regarding vaccines, Mr. Kennedy has been insistent that he just wants good science and to ensure safety. But on this topic, the science is good. The science is credible. Vaccines save lives. They are safe. They do not cause autism. If Mr. Kennedy is confirmed, I will use my authority as chairman of the Senate Committee with Oversight of HHS to rebuff any attempt to remove the public's access to life-saving vaccines. I will watch carefully for any effort to wrongfully sow public fear about vaccines between confusing references of coincidence and anecdote. But my support is built on assurances that this will not have to be a concern, and that he and I can work together to build an agenda to make America healthy again.
So let's see what the site says now about childhood vaccines and autism. Let me just read the first paragraph. Quote, Pursuant to the Data Quality Act, which requires federal agencies to ensure the quality, objectivity, utility, and integrity of information they disseminate to the public, this webpage has been updated because the statement, "vaccines do not cause autism," is not an evidence-based claim. Scientific studies have not ruled out the possibility that infant vaccines contribute to the development of autism. However, this statement has historically been disseminated by the CDC and other federal health agencies within HHS to prevent vaccine hesitancy, unquote. Well, it sure sounds like RFK Jr. lied in his Senate confirmation hearing, specifically to Senator Dr. Bill Cassidy, who probably feels like a dumbass for believing this brainworm-infected male crunchy mom would be honest in his testimony. Dr. Cassidy was on CNN just yesterday, so what do you have to say about all this? I'm sure he was outraged, right?
Dr. Cassidy, he lied to you. How worried are you that this change to the CDC's website and Secretary Kennedy's other actions are going to result in more dead Americans?
Anything that undermines the understanding, the correct understanding, the absolute scientifically based understanding that vaccines are safe and that if you don't take them, you're putting your child or yourself in greater danger. Anything that underlines that message is a problem. And so I want to make America healthy again. I agree with President Trump. Vaccines are safe. And so I just encourage everybody, if you've got a question, discuss with your physician. I will say, Jake, I've never met any parent who wasn't a pediatrician as well, who actually reads the CDC website.
What? Did I hear that right? Let's listen to some more.
This goes way beyond just vaccinations. A member of the Kennedy family this weekend, Tatiana Schlossberg, JFK's granddaughter, she has a moving essay in The New Yorker about her fatal cancer diagnosis. And in it she writes, quote, "As I spent more and more of my life under the care of doctors, nurses, and researchers striving to improve the lives of others, I watched as Bobby," that's a reference to RFK Jr., "cut nearly $500 million for research into mRNA vaccines, technology that could be used against certain cancers. He slashed billions in funding from the NIH." And she goes on and on and on. RFK Jr., according to his own family, is causing real damage to the health of the United States of America. You don't seem willing to criticize him by name at all, unlike members of his family.
So, Jake, clearly, this conversation, you want me to be on the record saying something negative. And, of course, it makes news if Republicans spite each other. I get that.
I don't even know that he's a Republican.
Rather focusing upon...
Yes, Jake Tapper is correct here. RFK Jr. is a liberal Democrat, and other than his crazy anti-vax views, he has traditional Democratic views on pretty much every issue, including subjects like climate change, labor unions, increasing the minimum wage, LGBT rights, and other subjects as well. In fact, RFK Jr. is arguably to the left of even Joe Biden on many issues, so how is it possible that he became a champion of modern-day conservatism? Well, the fact is that the anti-vax movement really started out on the left and was popularized by people like RFK Jr., Bill Maher, and Jenny McCarthy. And this isn't just conjecture and speculation here, chums. There is hard evidence that proves all of this. If you look at the United States before COVID, back in 2012, the states with the most kindergarten vaccine exceptions, meaning the states that were the most anti-vaccine, these were states that all had mostly liberal political slants. The highest number of exceptions were in Oregon back then, which is a deeply blue state. Conversely, if you look at the most pro-vaccine states in 2012, they were Mississippi and West Virginia, which are the most right-wing, deep red states in the entire country. So it may be hard for Gen Z to believe it because they're not old enough to remember a time of what politics looked like before the era of Trump. But believe it or not, the Republican Party used to be the party of science, while the Democratic Party was absolutely infested with woo-promoting, pseudo-scientific, crystal-gazing, alternative medicine, new age crunchy Karens who like to hold up the line at Starbucks to make the barista check if the pumpkin spice latte is gluten-free. Those people have all become Republicans now. Back in 2010 or so, if you were to talk about being against vaccines, or buying organic food, avoiding GMOs, or using alternative medicine like homeopathy or ear candles, Republicans would have made fun of you. But today, they're the ones who are doing all of that. 10 years ago, if you were to tell me that the Green Party would successfully infiltrate and take over the GOP, I would have thought you were crazy. But that's exactly what has happened. So, how do we get to this point? It's obviously because of the extreme polarization of our politics thanks to social media, and with the growing ubiquity of smartphones, social media has become the only source of information where the majority of Americans get their news or information about anything. Because of this, the pendulum has swung dramatically, and now the top states for vaccination are blue states, with Massachusetts at the very top, and the worst states are red states, with Mississippi, which used to be number 1 in vaccinations, but now is the very worst state. So, what happened is that all these crunchy people went down the woo to Q pipeline and left the Democratic Party to join the Republican Party. So now the Republicans have become the party of anti-vaccine, raw milk chugging, fluoride-phobic soccer moms with a self-diagnosed gluten sensitivity. This explains why Republicans can embrace a Democrat like RFK Jr. because they hate vaccines so much that they're willing to overlook the fact that RFK Jr. himself is a liberal Democrat whose views are an anathema to everything conservatives otherwise stand for. I think this polemic shift in people's perception towards vaccines based on partisan politics came from this nation's outrage over mask and vaccine mandates during COVID. In hindsight, even though I'm pro-vaccine, I don't think the vaccine mandates were a good idea. I, of course, think people should have gotten vaccinated, especially back when the virus was at its most deadly, but I think the government shutdowns and mandates created such an intense polarization of my country's culture and politics that it has created a resulting distrust in science in general that will continue to harm the United States for at least another generation. The only reason why people like RFK Jr. are even relevant today is because of America's outrage over our government's response to COVID-19. If you guys watch my channel, I actually made a video defending the COVID vaccine several years ago. It is actually my most disliked video of all time, and people have asked me if I've changed my opinion in any way since then. The answer is both yes and no. Even though I definitely stand behind what I said regarding the science of the COVID vaccine, I do in hindsight wish the government had handled the response differently. I think we should have just made the vaccine available so that those who wanted to get the vaccine could get it, and those who didn't want to didn't have to, and they could deal with whatever consequences that would bring them. And the reason I changed my mind on that is because, like I was talking about earlier, I think the political fallout from policies like mask and vaccine mandates have created such a distrust of science in general that it has been more damaging than the COVID pandemic itself. The only reason I'm bringing this up, though, at all is because I know people will try to argue with me and try to change the subject to the COVID vaccine, but that is a complete red herring. This CDC page about autism has nothing to do with the COVID vaccine, so I don't want to hear anyone bring up the COVID vaccine. It's all about childhood vaccination we're talking about here, which is a totally different subject. So whatever your views are or were about the COVID vaccine, it shouldn't influence how you feel about this change to the CDC website. So let's get back to the bullshit that RFK Jr. has defaced the CDC website with. So RFK Jr. says that half of surveyed parents of autistic children believe vaccines played a role in their child's autism. I wonder where that idea came from. I'm sure these parents came up with this connection all by themselves. I wonder why they aren't worried about seatbelts causing autism too. Is it maybe possible that the omnipresent anti-vax propaganda on social media has something to do with this? RFK Jr. then shows that the number of recommended vaccinations has gone up since 1986. He then makes the astounding connection that both the number of vaccines and the prevalence of autism have risen since the 1980s. There are a lot of things that have risen since the 1980s too. How about seatbelt use? The rise of seatbelt use also correlates with the increase in autism. So why isn't RFK Jr. on a mission to prove that seatbelts cause autism? After all, it's never been proven that seatbelts don't cause autism, right? In the immortal words of my good friend and associate Eddie Goki, association can never inform causation. Okay. So later in the paragraph, he admits that the association can't prove causation, but the implication is that, yes, this association is causative. There's another association that he doesn't mention that is causative, specifically that vaccines have worked to eliminate terrible diseases. Vaccines eliminated smallpox, and they had virtually eliminated polio and measles too. Measles was finally declared eliminated in the year 2000 in the United States. That is, of course, until RFK Jr.'s unsubstantiated anti-vax propaganda brought measles back with a vengeance. The big problem with vaccine hesitancy, especially as it relates to measles, is that measles is the most contagious virus known to humankind. The virus remains in the air for 2 hours after an infectious person has left the room, and the infection rate amongst unvaccinated people is 90%. So, to put that into perspective, if you just enter the same room of someone who was there 2 hours ago and had measles, you now have a 90% chance of getting measles yourself, unless of course you're vaccinated. 2 doses of the MMR vaccine are 97% effective in preventing infection, and it takes 95% vaccination rate in the community to prevent infection. So even a small increase in vaccine hesitancy can cause severe outbreaks that kill many people. So it's no surprise that we are seeing measles outbreaks again, even after the disease was declared eliminated 25 years ago, and it's no surprise that most of these cases have been in Texas. At this point, I wouldn't be surprised if we see smallpox make a comeback thanks to this disgrace to our nation's health known as RFK Jr. Also, unsurprisingly, over 90% of the cases have occurred in unvaccinated people. Even RFK Jr. has to admit on the CDC website that the MMR vaccine, meaning the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccines, have been repeatedly studied, and there is a high strength of evidence that there is no association with autism spectrum based on observational studies, but then adds the word only. He says, based on observation only. Of course, it would be completely unethical to do a prospective randomized control trial where half the children get a placebo and so would be at risk of getting these 3 deadly childhood diseases, especially since the MMR vaccine has already been proven to prevent all those diseases. So why the hell isn't RFK Jr. content with this data? Especially since one of the observational studies, the Danish study, looked at the outcomes in every child born in Denmark from 1999 to 2010, which was 657,461 children, and the study found no association between vaccination and autism. In fact, the risk ratio for getting autism for MMR vaccinated versus MMR unvaccinated children was 0.93, which just barely missed being a statistically significant lowering of the risk of autism in vaccinated children. The whole MMR vaccine link to autism was started by a fraudulent scientific paper published in 1998 in the Lancet by Andrew Wakefield. Andrew Wakefield is a real criminal. It took 12 years for it to be determined that the data was faked and the paper was retracted, but the damage was unfortunately already done, and RFK Jr. has personally determined that vaccines do cause autism, so now he is on a quest to prove that he is right at any cost necessary, which is not how science is supposed to work. With science, you don't cling to an unproven hypothesis when all the evidence refutes what you believe. You base your beliefs on the best available data. But RFK Jr. isn't a scientist, nor does he have any understanding of science whatsoever. He's an agenda-driven ideologue who would sooner die than admit he's wrong about anything. He will keep demanding more and more evidence until he finds something he can use to confirm his biases, no matter how shaky, biased, or flat-out fraudulent his source of information may be. So, he spends the rest of the CDC page trying to gaslight the dozen or more studies showing that vaccines don't cause autism. He quotes an old review from 2012 criticizing these studies for methodological flaws, and again complains that they are epidemiological studies that cannot prove causation, even though, like I said already, randomized control trials would be an unethical and a completely unnecessary thing to do because there is no reliable data that actually shows any association between vaccines and autism. He complains that the studies, quote, fail to account for mechanistic and other evidence linking vaccines with autism, unquote. But he cites none of this supposed evidence, and of course, he's completely wrong because outcome data is much stronger evidence than any theoretical mechanistic evidence. You don't get to use weaker forms of evidence to overrule stronger forms of evidence by speculating about mechanism. RFK Jr. then quotes the Danish study I just mentioned, though he quotes the version of the study published in 2002, not the more up-to-date publication from 2019 that I showed you. And he then says, without any evidence, as usual, that since the vaccination schedule in Denmark is slightly different than the US, then that means the results may be unreliable. He then tries to blame aluminum in vaccines as the culprit, even though the MMR vaccines don't even contain aluminum, although other vaccines do. So, after citing some studies detailing the amount of aluminum in certain vaccines, RFK Jr. then cites a study showing a link between aluminum and not autism. This time he's claiming it causes asthma. So, what does autism have to do with asthma, you may wonder? Well, the answer is nothing at all. They are completely separate pathologies. But then, he turns back to another Danish study. This one included 1.2 million children between the years 1997 and 2018. But this study showed no association between aluminum and vaccines and autism, or with asthma either for that matter. But oh no, we can't have that because it didn't tell RFK Jr. what he wanted to hear, so he's not done yet. He then looked through the supplemental data from the study and cherry-picked some data from the specific years that seemed to support his aluminum theory. But the overall study showed no such conclusions. You can't just cherry-pick parts of the study that support your biases while ignoring the result of the study that included all the data and concludes that there was no link between vaccines and autism. The people who actually do these studies agree that this is just intentional misinterpretation of the studies. But this is how a mental invalid who has never been trained in science like RFK Jr. operates. He doesn't know what the fuck he is doing, and the brain-dead senators who put him in charge like Dr. Cassidy should be dying of embarrassment right now. They should be ashamed. But judging from his CNN interview, Dr. Cassidy is just fine with RFK Jr. lying right to his face.
Dr. Cassidy, he lied to you.
Wow, what a cuck. If you live in Louisiana, please vote this ass clown out of office. I don't believe for a single second that Dr. Cassidy doesn't regret his vote for RFK Jr. He just doesn't want to admit that someone as stupid as RFK Jr. managed to fool him. But he did fool him, and Dr. Cassidy is the real fool for not realizing that someone as unprincipled, opportunistic, and unethical as RFK Jr. would be willing to do whatever it takes, including lying, in order to get into power. So finally, RFK Jr. ends with this paragraph, quote, HHS will evaluate possible biologic mechanisms between early childhood vaccinations and autism. Mechanisms for further investigation include the impacts of aluminum-adjuvants, risks for certain children with mitochondrial disorders, harms of neuroinflammation, and more. Unquote. Notice his frequent use of all these pseudoscientific buzzwords, mechanisms, mitochondria, neuroinflammation, etc., all common characteristics of a pseudo-intellectual. This kind of medical gobbledygook is the tripe you hear on videos made by carnivore gurus where they attempt to sound smarter than they really are. This is not how a true scientist would word things. A true scientist would conclude from the data that there is no evidence that vaccines cause autism, and they would base that conclusion on the totality of evidence. This kind of garbage we come to expect from social media, of course, but this is the CDC of the United States we're talking about here, once a highly respected repository of scientific information. But now, it can't even keep its story straight. Other pages on the CDC website continue to just state plainly that vaccines don't cause autism since they don't. So, not only is there misinformation on vaccines, it's not even a consistent message. It's no wonder that the actual scientists at the CDC, the ones who haven't already been fired by RFK Jr., are sickened by all of this. As one of them said, quote, people will be harmed by this. Parents will decide not to vaccinate their kids because of false information, and kids will get sick and die as a result, unquote. So RFK Jr. is an abomination. Putting him in charge of the HHS would be like letting Jeffrey Epstein babysit your kids. It is probably the worst cabinet appointment in U.S. history. But fortunately, RFK Jr. is a burden that Trump nor the United States has to put up with anymore. Trump added him to his cabinet in exchange for RFK Jr.'s endorsement because Trump knew that if he lost the 2024 election, he was probably going to jail, so he was desperate to win at any cost. But Trump is pretty much king now, so he doesn't have to put up with RFK Jr.'s bullshit anymore, and why would he? Trump is a lifelong germaphobe, and he is pro-vaccine. His first administration helped spearhead the development of the COVID vaccine with Operation Warp Speed, and that's something that Trump is proud of. It's the one thing people on the right don't want to give Trump credit for, even though he likely saved thousands of lives. Just listen to the man himself.
The vaccine is one of the greatest achievements of mankind. We would have had a 1917, remember the Spanish flu, killed perhaps 100 million people. Actually, it ended the First World War because the soldiers were so. A lot of people don't know that. The soldiers got so sick. It was a terrible thing. There were no vaccines. There was no anything. I came up with a vaccine, with 3 vaccines. All are very, very good. Came up with 3 of them in less than 9 months. It was supposed to take 5 to 12 years.
And yet more people have died under COVID this year, by the way, under Joe Biden.
Right.
Than under you, and more people took the vaccine this year. So people are questioning how.
Well, no, the vaccine worked, but some people aren't taking it. The ones that get very sick and go to the hospital are the ones that don't take the vaccine. But it's still their choice. And if you take the vaccine, you're protected. Look, the results of the vaccine are very good. And if you do get it, it's a very minor form. People aren't dying when they take the vaccine.
The only reason his rhetoric has shifted against vaccines recently is because Trump doesn't want to admit he was wrong to appoint RFK Jr., even though I'm sure he regrets it. Trump's approval ratings have cratered recently, and it's likely going to get worse if RFK Jr. stays in power because Americans generally aren't very fond of children dying regardless of what their political party is. So, if Trump really wants to get back into the good graces of the American voters and have a better chance of retaining the House and the Senate in next year's midterm elections, the easiest thing he can do right now is to tell RFK Jr. to go fuck himself and fire him. I'm out.